The monitors were screaming. Not one, all of them. 4 machines circled the bed, red lights flashing, alarms slicing through the quiet of the mansion. The bed itself was massive, more expensive than most apartments in Seoul, yet the man lying on it looked small and helpless. Kang Minjae, 51, the most feared figure in Seoul's underworld, convulsed beneath the restraints in his private medical wing, a wing so lavish it could have funded a district hospital. And despite every luxury and every tool money could buy, he was dying. 3 senior doctors surrounded the bed. One of them, Dr. Yun, had trained at Johns Hopkins and held 2 subspecialties in toxicology and emergency medicine. He was sweating through his collar. His hands, which did not shake during 9-hour surgeries, were shaking now. The room smelled of antiseptic and the particular metallic edge that fills a space when blood pressure drops to dangerous thresholds. The walls were white. The equipment was state-of-the-art. Everything that money could buy to keep a man alive was in this room. None of it was working. This wasn't street poison. This was engineered. Designed by someone who knew his body and how to break it. His heart rate spiked. Dropped. Spiked again. In the far corner of the room, near the door, exactly where non-essential staff were expected to remain invisible, stood a woman named Adaeze Okafor, 34 years old, Nigerian-born. She had worked in this mansion for 6 years as a senior housekeeper, and in 6 years she had become precisely what the household wanted her to be: efficient, unnoticed, and entirely beneath consideration. Kang Minjae had spoken to her exactly 4 times in 6 years. Once to complain that the guest bathroom smelled of the wrong cleaning product. Once to tell her to move out of a hallway where he was walking. Once to correct her Korean pronunciation in front of other staff members with a flatness that left no room for dignity. And once, on the day she had been caught reading a medical reference book in the break room, to ask, with the thin amusement of a man who finds other people's ambitions entertaining, whether she thought she was a doctor. In the corridor outside the medical wing, 3 of Kang Minjae's senior executives had gathered in a loose cluster that was arranged with just enough informality to look accidental. It was not accidental. They arranged themselves with intention and then gave the arrangement the aesthetic of coincidence. If he doesn't recover, Park Sung-ho began. He will recover, said the man beside him. I'm speaking hypothetically. Hypotheticals create liabilities. The man who had shut down the conversation was Jeon Hyun-sik, head of security. He stood with his arms folded and his face arranged in the expression of a man deeply concerned about his employer. He was watching the medical wing doors with an attention that looked like worry and was, in fact, something considerably more calculated. Park Sung-ho lowered his voice. The Incheon operation needs a decision by Friday, if there's no one to make it. There will be someone to make it. Back inside the medical wing, Dr. Yun made the decision that every doctor in that room had been dreading since the first monitor spiked 40 minutes ago. Clear the room, he said. Non-essential personnel out now. A guard in a dark suit swept his gaze around the room. He made eye contact with Adaeze and pointed toward the door with the casual authority of a man who has never had to repeat himself. She did not move. He took 2 steps toward her. Out, he said, in Korean, then slower as though the problem might be language. Leave now. Adaeze looked at the guard. Then she looked at Dr. Yun. Then she said, in clear, unhurried Korean, the compound in his system is a modified alkaloid derivative, probably synthetic. Your antidotes are accelerating the hepatotoxic cycle because you're treating it as a standard cholinergic block. It isn't. The compound needs to be drawn out, not neutralized. If you push one more systemic antidote, you will kill him faster than the poison will. The room went very still. Dr. Yun stared at her. Who are you? I clean the East Wing, she said, and I know what this poison is. For 4 seconds, no one moved. The monitors continued their assault on the silence. Kang Minjae's chest heaved once, twice, a body fighting a battle it was not winning. He will not survive this. 3 words. The most feared man in Seoul, reduced to 3 words and a horizontal line. In the corridor, Park Sung-ho heard the monitors change. He straightened his jacket. He exchanged a glance with the second executive, a man named Cho Dongwon, who handled the Northern Distribution Networks. Cho Dongwon gave the smallest possible nod, the nod of a man confirming a plan that has been in place for longer than today. Jeon Hyun-sik watched them both. He did not nod. He did not need to. He had written the plan they were nodding about. Inside the medical wing, Adaeze Okafor walked to the bed. No one stopped her. Not because they had decided to trust her, they had not decided anything. They were in the aftermath of a declaration of defeat, and in that specific window of stunned helplessness, hierarchy collapses. Status becomes irrelevant. The guard who had told her to leave was standing against the wall doing nothing. Dr. Yun was staring at a flatline. The other 2 doctors were looking at each other with the expressions of men who have run out of options and have not yet adjusted to what that means. She did not ask permission. She spoke as she moved, explaining to the room in the even, precise cadence of someone who has done this before under worse conditions with fewer resources. You're treating it wrong. The poison needs to be drawn out, not neutralized. If you push another antidote, you'll kill him. That's why filtration isn't working. You're catching it after it's already embedded. You need to draw it back through the tissue before it completes its second cycle. My mother called it pulling the root before the plant sets. From a small kit she retrieved from her uniform pocket, a kit she carried because of what she had grown up watching, because of what she had read, because preparation was something her mother had treated as a form of love, she removed 3 items. A folded cloth packet of compressed dried herbs, bitter nettle, black seed, and a 3rd ingredient that did not have a common English name, but that her mother had cultivated in a small clay pot outside their front door in Enugu, and that Adaeze had sourced every 3 months from a specialty supplier in Lagos who shipped it to Seoul in vacuum-sealed packaging. A small glass vial of pressed oil, extracted from the same 3rd herb. And a specific technique, not mystical, not magical, entirely biomechanical, involving precise pressure application to the lymphatic pathways beneath the collarbone and along the inner arm. Designed to reverse the direction of the compound's movement through the tissue and force it toward the surface of the skin, where the herbal compress could draw it out by osmotic pressure differential. This will cause convulsions, she said. Do not interfere with them. Dr. Yun opened his mouth. He is already flatlined, she said, without looking up. You have nothing left to protect him from. She applied the compress to his chest. She began the pressure sequence along his left arm with both hands, methodical and unhurried, her eyes tracking his color, his lip pallor, the slight movement in his chest that said something in him was still fighting. 1 minute. 2. His body seized. Violently, both arms, his back arching off the bed with a force that would have broken restraints on a lesser frame. Should we? Don't touch him, she said. She maintained the pressure. She moved her hands up the lymphatic path, repeating the sequence, her face composed in the particular way of someone who was afraid and was not allowing the fear to be faster than the work. The convulsion peaked. Held. Released. Silence. The flatline continued for 4 seconds. 5. 6. Then. Beep. 1 heartbeat, irregular, weak, but present. Beep. Another. Beep, beep. Dr. Yun made a sound that was not a word. He moved to the monitor, stared at the display, checked the reading twice against the secondary machine, as though he did not trust what the first one was telling him. The readings were real. Kang Minjae's heart was beating. Weakly, irregularly, but beating. Adaeze removed the compress slowly. She stepped back from the bed. She folded the cloth carefully, returned it and the vial to her kit, and replaced the kit in her pocket. She looked at the patient, not with satisfaction, not with sentimentality, with the clinical attention of someone confirming a result. Then she looked up. The room was staring at her. Park Sung-ho and Cho Dongwon, who had entered quietly during the final moments, stood near the door with expressions that had not yet settled into anything coherent. The succession conversation they had been arranging in the corridor had just been made irrelevant, and neither of them had had enough time to recalibrate. Jeon Hyunsik stood behind them. He was not staring like the others. He was watching. There was a difference. The others were surprised. Jeon Hyunsik was calculating. Adaeze met his eyes across the room. She held them for exactly 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, 2 things happened. She saw something in him that she filed immediately and carefully, and he understood from the precision of her gaze, from the stillness of her face, that she had filed it. He woke 9 hours later. Not dramatically, not with a gasp or a sudden sitting up from the pillow, the way characters come back to life in films. He surfaced slowly, consciousness reassembling itself from fragments, the sound of the air filtration system, the pressure of a compression cuff on his left arm, the smell of antiseptic, and something faintly botanical that didn't belong in a medical room. Kang Minjae opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling for 30 seconds before he spoke. "Bring me water." His voice was reduced to something rough and compressed, like gravel pressed into a smaller space than it had been designed for. But it was his voice. It carried the same frequency of command that it had always carried, and everyone in the recovery room responded to it the same way they always had, immediately. He drank half the glass. He set it down. He looked at Dr. Yun, who was standing at the bedside with the expression of a man who has simultaneously experienced a professional humiliation and a genuine miracle, and has not yet determined the appropriate ratio of each to display. "Explain," Kang Minjae said. Dr. Yun explained. He used careful, technical language that covered the nature of the compound, the failure of the standard antidotes, and the unconventional intervention that had reversed the cardiac arrest. He described it as precisely as he could, which meant that the part he was most uncertain about, the mechanism by which the herbal extraction had worked, was described with slightly less precision than the rest. "The compound," Kang Minjae said, "where did it come from?" "We are still analyzing." "Where did it come from?" Dr. Yun paused. "It was introduced into your system through something you ingested. The timing suggests approximately 40 minutes before collapse." Kang Minjae was quiet. His eyes moved to the window. Outside, the estate grounds were dark and still in the early hours of the morning. He was thinking, even now, depleted and physically wrung out, he was thinking, running the 40 minutes backward in his mind, reconstructing the sequence of events with the methodical intensity that had kept him alive and ahead for 23 years. "The woman who treated me," he said, "bring her here." She returned to her duties and Now. Adaeze came in without nervousness. This was the thing Kang Minjae noticed first, because nervousness in his presence was one of the most reliable constants of his professional life. Everyone was nervous in this room. Guards, executives, men who had operated criminal enterprises for decades went careful in this room. She stood at the appropriate distance from the bed and looked at him with the same composure she had maintained for 6 years in his household. The composure of someone who had decided, a long time ago, that she was not going to perform smallness for anyone, regardless of what that cost her. "You saved my life," he said. It was a statement, not a question. He did not do gratitude easily, and what he was offering was not gratitude yet. It was acknowledgement, which was, for a man like him, the precursor. "I stopped what was happening," she said. "Your body did the rest." He looked at her for a long moment. "Where did you learn that?" "My mother." "Your mother was a doctor." "She was a healer. They're not the same thing, but the knowledge is sometimes better." He said nothing for a while. He was looking at her differently than he had ever looked at her in 6 years, not yet with warmth, because warmth was not his default mode, but with the specific, recalibrating attention of a man who has realized that something he categorized incorrectly has been sitting in front of him for 6 years, and that the miscategorization nearly killed him, in more than one sense. "Where did you grow up?" "Enugu, Nigeria." "Your family?" Something moved through her expression, too fast to be theatrical, real enough to be worth watching. My mother still lives there. My brothers, we were poor. She healed people with what she had, which wasn't much. He nodded once. He looked back at the window. You can go back to work, he said. She left without ceremony. He waited until the door closed. Then he said to the remaining security aide in the corner of the room, pull the last 48 hours of internal footage, every camera, every corridor, dining room, hallway, kitchen access, all of it, and don't tell Jian. The aide blinked. Don't tell the head of security. Kang Minjae looked at him. Especially not him. He reviewed the footage alone, from a secondary terminal in the recovery room, when the medical staff had been rotated out for their scheduled break. He was still attached to monitors. He watched the footage in 12-minute segments, each one methodical, scanning with the habit of a man who knows exactly what guilty behavior looks like, because he has spent 3 decades operating at its highest levels. He found it at the 17-minute mark. Corridor outside the private dining room. 2:43 in the afternoon of the previous day, 26 minutes before he had collapsed. His personal aide had been carrying his afternoon tea from the kitchen. Standard routine. Same route, same tray, same ceramic cup he had used for 11 years. Jian Hyun-sik had been walking the opposite direction in the corridor. They had passed each other. The aide had nodded, eyes down, subordinate reflex. Jian Hyun-sik had paused, turned slightly, gestured at something past the aide's shoulder, drawing his attention away. 12 seconds. 12 seconds, in which the aide was looking the wrong direction. 12 seconds, in which Jian Hyun-sik's right hand was at the level of the tray. Then the aide turned back. Jian Hyun-sik was already continuing down the corridor, his face forward, his pace unchanged, his posture carrying not a single gram of deviation from normalcy. Kang Minjae watched the 12-second segment 4 times. On the 4th viewing, he pressed pause. He sat in the recovery room, in the pre-dawn quiet of his own estate, still connected to monitors that 24 hours ago had announced his death, and he looked at the frozen image of a man he had trusted for 11 years and allowed himself, for exactly 30 seconds, to feel something. Then he closed the feeling, and he began to plan. He did not use his own people for this. That was the first decision. His forensics team, his toxicology contacts, his internal investigators, all of them had, at some point in the past 11 years, been vetted by or interfaced with Jian Hyun-sik. Any of them could carry a thread he pulled back to the man. A man who had built this kingdom's defenses knew every wall and knew which ones sounded hollow. So he used an outside source, a forensic toxicologist who worked for 3 of Seoul's largest insurance firms and had no connection to Kang Minjae's world. He had the doctor arrange the sample transfer under a different patient identity through the hospital's external laboratory protocol. Meticulous, untraceable in every direction that mattered. The results came back in 31 hours. The compound was a proprietary synthetic alkaloid. It had no commercial equivalent. It had not been synthesized in a university setting. Its construction required a privately equipped laboratory with a specific profile of chemical instrumentation. It was not the kind of thing you sourced from a catalog. It was the kind of thing you commissioned. The toxicologist's report listed 3 facilities in South Korea with the capacity to produce it. 2 of the 3 facilities were clean. The 3rd was registered to a holding company called Changgang Logistics. Changgang Logistics was owned by a parent entity called JH Private Capital. JH Private Capital had been incorporated 14 months ago. Jian Hyun-sik's initials. Not conclusive in court. Conclusive enough. The picture that assembled itself over the following 48 hours was not chaotic. That was the worst part of it. It was organized. Patient. The work of someone who had spent a long time studying the architecture of the empire from the inside and had identified every pressure point, every succession pathway, every legal and operational gap through which a controlled transfer of power could be routed if the person at the top was no longer present to contest it. Jian Hyun-sik had been preparing for 14 months. He had cultivated 2 of the 3 executives who had been whispering in the corridor, not with promises of wealth, which men like Park Sung-ho already had, but with something more seductive, a guarantee of continuity. The message had been simple and delivered over months of careful, deniable conversation. When the transition comes, and it will come because everything transitions, you want to be aligned with the person who manages it cleanly. He had positioned himself as the safe bet, the responsible successor, the man of institutional continuity. He had poisoned his employer with the cold precision of an accountant closing a ledger. And he had nearly succeeded. The one variable he had not accounted for, the one element in the calculation that had no entry in his risk assessment, was a Nigerian woman who cleaned the East Wing and had memorized a medical reference book and carried dried herbs in her uniform pocket because her mother had taught her that preparation was something you did not wait for emergencies to begin. He called the meeting for a Thursday morning. Not in his private office. In the formal boardroom, the room used for decisions that needed witnesses. Long table, high-backed chairs, the Seoul skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows, gray and enormous and indifferent. He came in last. He was still physically diminished, the color of someone who had lost a serious fight with his own body and was in the early stages of taking the win back. But his posture said nothing about diminishment. His posture said what it had always said. I am the one in this room who decides what happens next. He sat at the head of the table. He looked at the assembled senior leadership, 8 men, 7 of whom had not yet been told why they were here. And then he looked at Jeon Hyun-sik, who sat in his customary chair 2 seats to the right, face composed, posture controlled, carrying the same expression he had carried through 11 years of these meetings. Attentive, reliable, the trusted hand. Kang Minjae opened a folder on the table in front of him. He did not rush. 3 days ago, he said, someone introduced a synthetic compound into my afternoon tea. The compound was engineered specifically to defeat standard medical antidotes. The intention was that I would not survive the night. Silence around the table. Real silence from 6 men, performed silence from 1. I want to show you something, he said. The monitor on the wall displayed the corridor footage, the 17-minute mark, the aid, the tray, the 12-second window. No one moved. He let it play twice. Jeon Hyun-sik, he said, do you want to speak to this? Jeon Hyun-sik looked at the monitor. Then he looked at Kang Minjae. His face did not break. He was too disciplined for that. But something in his eyes made a small, almost imperceptible adjustment, the way a man's eyes adjust when he is no longer in a game he controls, but is calculating whether there is another game available. The footage shows a corridor interaction, Jeon Hyun-sik said. It doesn't show. I have the toxicology report, Kang Minjae said. I have the shell company trace. I have 14 months of financial records that show the slow assembly of an alternative power structure built inside my own organization. He paused. I have the testimonies of 2 executives in this room who, when offered full immunity from consequence in exchange for complete disclosure, chose disclosure. 2 chairs shifted slightly. Park Sung-ho and Cho Dong-won, who had been briefed privately in the 48 hours prior, did not make eye contact with Jeon Hyun-sik. That was the moment, not the footage, not the documents. The moment was when the loyalty shifted visibly, and Jeon Hyun-sik saw it shift. He sat for a while in the particular stillness of a man who has arrived at the end of a path he constructed and is assessing whether there is any path back. There was not. He had built this too carefully for there to be any remaining ambiguity about authorship. He set his hands flat on the table. You'll handle this how you handle everything, he said. Not a plea, a statement, the last movement of a man arranging his dignity. Kang Minjae looked at him across the long table. Yes, he said simply, I will. 2 men who had been standing near the door, not his usual security, not anyone Jeon Hyun-sik had ever met, stepped forward. Jeon Hyun-sik stood. He straightened his jacket. He walked out between them without resistance, with the controlled bearing of a man maintaining the one thing that had not been taken from him yet. The boardroom door closed. The remaining executives looked at Kang Minjae. He looked back at them with the expression of a man who has resolved a problem and is already thinking about the next one. "The Incheon operation proceeds as planned," he said. "Park, you have your decision by end of day. Any further questions?" There were no further questions. He did not go to her directly. Men like Kang Minjae did not process debts emotionally, they processed them structurally. Gratitude, in his world, was not a sentiment. It was an obligation that needed to be discharged with appropriate weight. He had been miscalibrated on her for 6 years. The recalibration required action proportional to the error. He had his outside researcher, the same one who had handled the forensics trail, compile a full background report on Adaeze Okafor. Not surveillance. History, family, circumstances. What the report contained was this. Her mother, Adaeze Okafor, 61 years old, continued practicing traditional medicine in a 2-room structure in a low-income neighborhood of Enugu. She treated 40 to 60 patients per week with no formal equipment, no clean water infrastructure, and no income beyond voluntary contributions from the families she helped. She had been doing this for 31 years. Her 2 younger brothers, 26 and 23, had both been forced to leave formal education due to financial constraints. The younger one was working in a transport yard. The older one had been accepted to a technical institute 3 years ago and had been unable to pay the enrollment fee. The family had a debt outstanding against their property, a lender's claim that had accumulated interest over years into an amount that was, for them, insurmountable. The property included the structure where Adaeze Okafor continued to treat patients. She had sent home 60% of her salary for 6 years. 60%, 6 years. Kang Minjae read this last line twice. He set the report down. He picked up his phone and made 4 calls. He did not tell Adaeze he was making them. The debt against the Okafor property was cleared within 72 hours through a legal firm that handled transactions without disclosing clients. Standard practice in several of Kang Minjae's legitimate subsidiaries. The enrollment fee for the Technical Institute was paid anonymously through the Institute's scholarship administration. A construction and infrastructure firm that Kang Minjae held a majority stake in, with an active West Africa operations division, received a private directive. Design and build a properly equipped community health clinic on a designated plot in Enugu. 1 clinic, clean water integration, basic diagnostic equipment, a monthly operational budget routed through a registered NGO subsidiary. The project timeline, 90 days. He did not announce any of this. He did not tell anyone in his household. He did not, for 3 weeks, say anything different to Adaeze than he had ever said, which was very little. She found out on a Tuesday evening. She was in the East Wing, completing the last of her rounds, when her phone rang. It was her mother's number. She answered in Igbo, the language of home, the one she switched to automatically when something felt important, and the first thing she heard was not a greeting. Her mother was crying. Not in distress. The other kind, the kind that arrives when something that has been heavy for a very long time is suddenly, without explanation, no longer heavy. The kind of crying that needs a witness because the joy is too large for one person to hold without it spilling. Adaeze sat down on the floor of the East Wing corridor, her back against the wall, and listened to her mother tell her about the debt that had been cleared, about the construction crew that had arrived and begun surveying the clinic plot, about the call from the institute confirming her brother's enrollment, about the clean water assessment team who had knocked on the door that afternoon. "Who sent them?" Adaeze asked. "Mama, who sent them?" They said a company. They would not say more. She sat in the corridor for a long time after the call ended. She was not naive. She knew one person in Seoul with the capacity and the motive. She knew it with the same precision that she had known, looking across a medical room at a man calculating his next move, that something in the room had changed. She thought about going to him, about saying something, about finding the language for a transaction that had no category she had ever used, not gratitude exactly, because what he had given was not charity. He had simply redistributed a debt, corrected an accounting error that the world had been running for 6 years on the wrong side of. She thought about what her mother had said, in the last seconds before hanging up, in the voice of a woman who had healed people for 31 years with no equipment and no recognition. Ada, whatever you are doing there, whatever sacrifice you are making, it is not wasted. Nothing that comes from good hands is ever wasted. She did not go to him that evening. She finished her rounds. She left at the end of her shift. He was on the balcony when she arrived. She saw him from the garden path below, a man standing in the gray early light of a Seoul morning, looking out at the city that had been his for 2 decades. He was dressed as he always dressed, dark, precise, no excess. But there was something different in his posture from the posture she had observed for 6 years. 6 years of watching a man from the periphery gave you a vocabulary for the small variations that others missed. The way a person held their weight differently when they were thinking about something instead of executing something. The particular quality of stillness that belongs to someone who has recently survived something and is still processing what that means. She stopped on the garden path. He turned. Perhaps he heard the sound of her footsteps on the stone, or perhaps he had the same peripheral awareness of her that she had developed of him over 6 years in this house. They looked at each other across the distance, between the balcony and the garden path. She said nothing. He said nothing. Then she gave him a single, precise nod. Not of subordination, not of deference. Of acknowledgement, between equals. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded back, the same nod, the same weight. She continued toward the entrance. In the months that followed, things inside the empire shifted. Not dramatically, not with announcements. Kang Minjae did not become soft. Softness was not the recalibration the experience had produced. What it produced was precision. A re-examination of the structures he operated and the people inside them, conducted with the eyes of someone who had just had the most expensive lesson of his life about the cost of miscategorization. He restructured his empire quietly, removed the highest risks, rebuilt security from the ground up. He cut off the succession path Jeon Hyun-sik had been preparing for over a year. He did not do any of this because he had become a different person. He did it because he had become a more precise version of the same person, one who had been reminded, in the starkest possible terms, of the fundamental strategic error of treating information as a function of status. Adaeze Okafor continued working in the East Wing. Her role was adjusted, not publicly, not with a formal title change that would require explanation, simply in the way of things that shift when the person at the top of a hierarchy recalibrates. Her recommendations in the household were listened to. The space she was given to occupy expanded without anyone announcing the expansion. Her mother's clinic opened on a Wednesday morning in Enugu, 92 days after the construction team broke ground. Adaeze Okafor stood in the doorway of the first properly equipped space she had ever had, with running water and clean equipment and a locked medicine storage unit and a waiting area with chairs, and she called her daughter. Adaeze answered from the East Wing. She kept her face composed throughout the call. When she was finished, she stood in the East Wing for a moment. She looked at the room that had been her periphery for 6 years, the room she had made invisible herself in for 6 years, the room where nothing of her had been registered or counted or considered. She thought, I came here with empty hands, and I did not leave empty-handed. I came here without being seen, and I did not leave unseen. My mother built everything she had from herbs in a clay pot and 31 years of showing up. I learned from my mother. She went back to work. He had been the most feared man in Seoul for 23 years. He had survived assassinations, betrayals, investigations, and the slow institutional violence of a world that requires you to trust people you cannot fully verify. He had survived all of it. And in the end, the thing that saved him was not his power, not his money, not the armed men at every corridor. It was a woman he had looked through for 6 years, who had learned everything she knew from poverty and love and a mother with a clay pot, who had carried her knowledge into his house quietly and waited, without knowing she was waiting, for the moment it would matter, Never underestimate the quiet person in the room. Power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it simply waits until the moment it is the only thing left standing. And then it acts.